Our featured speaker today is Seattle 4 member Tom Hayward. Tom's speech today is entitled Veterans, Who Are They? Please welcome Seattle 4 member Admiral Tom Hayward.
Thank you, President Stan, and thank all of you for giving me the privilege to share some thoughts about Veterans Day. It's pretty clear at this moment that we've just heard a great bit about what Veterans Day is for, about what great people have served, and Ray, thank you for that. That was a fabulous story of dedication and love and care. And you know, the Vietnamese War was a tough one. The veterans are the largest public group we have in America today. It was a tough time for them then. I'm not sure that the damage to our culture still doesn't reside. For those who have served, we had 8.7 million of our men and women in uniform during the Vietnamese War. 2.7 million of them served in Vietnam, and they struggled mightily to be accepted back home. Tough time. I think we're sort of over that. But those of us who were there and who served in uniform and have something to do with policy find ourselves still conflicted enormously over Vietnam. The reason being that we didn't lose the war, but we also didn't win the war. More than that, the public is not aware because it's politically incorrect to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is we could have won that war in easily less than 2 years if there had been respect given to the military opinion and professionalism. Not known to anybody in here, I would guess, is that there was a major meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff relatively soon after the start of the war, and they came up with a plan to mine the key harbors and coastline, to bomb Hanoi, Haiphong, and put pressure, real pressure, on the North Vietnamese. Our Secretary of Defense and his staff rejected that plan, so they asked for a meeting with the President, which they got. But as you could expect, the President was forewarned of what they were about to propose, which they did, and had a very nasty meeting with the President, who rejected them and threw him out of the office with a string of profanity. That program was not executed until 8 years later, when President Nixon, frustrated with the inability to close the war, heard of the briefing, asked for it, and said, go ahead, and within a few weeks the war was over. We fought a war that we shouldn't have to be talking about in great length here. But it's part of our history. It's part of the veterans. As I say, the largest group of veterans in America today. We owe them a lot. And Ray, we owe your son a lot. God bless you. You know, there's something unique about our talking about Veterans Day, because we haven't had people stand up and explain where were they when. But I'll bet, facetiously, there probably isn't anybody here who was around during World War I. Fact of the matter is, do we? I don't mean around, I mean served. You know, the fact of the matter is, tomorrow is the 11th day of the 11th month of the year, and at the 1100th hour, the United States and our allies at that time will celebrate and recognize Armistice Day, the end of the fighting on the Western Front, World War I. I point that out because of the significance we really always have to remember. That was the war to end all wars. We lost millions, as did our friends and the enemy. Seems like we've been in combat ever since. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, Desert Storm, and now the events this young lady has participated in. So war is sort of the way it is, whether we like it or not. And the war to end all wars didn't. And we might as well recognize that it's highly unlikely that we're in the last one. There are something on the order of 1.47 million young men and women in the military today. 1.7 million. That's less than 1% of America. They create about 200 veterans a year, and of course bring in about 200 volunteers, 100% volunteers, many of whom go back for a second and third, fourth time as volunteers. Boy, those are fabulous veterans that we can be mighty proud of. I had great experiences. If war can be any fun, which it hardly is, but I can tell you that flying is a lot of fun. So my introduction to warfare was during Korea, and I fit in very well. It's what I wanted to do. Even though on one occasion I managed to collide with a large caliber anti-aircraft missile and knocked a 3-foot hole in my wing and set off the fire warning light on my one and only engine, and a few other ancillary problems that I had to deal with. Fortunately, I was able to get back over friendly territory. In fact, I ended up over a sort of a makeshift marine aviation field, and I'd lost my landing gear and flaps, so I made a no landing gear crash landing on their Marston matting, and it all turned out just fine. I tell this story because I spent 3 days there. This Marine base, Marine squadrons, 100% reserves. Many had flown in battle in World War II. They had all given up their jobs, been recalled, and went back to war in Korea. They would get up at 0 dark 30 and man their planes and leap off to go support the Marine ground troops, usually fly twice a day, come back when they've exhausted their ammunition, done their job, and immediately head for a makeshift club where they would consume as much alcohol as possible and sing glorious old songs and tell lies, and it was really inspiring. It gave me a different perspective of veterans, reserve veterans. They were great. Well, I was able to get back aboard ship and carry on with my job and do other things. I flew with some wonderful guys, one of whom was a young sprout by the name of Neil Armstrong, who I stay close to these days, and we all know of his exploits. he kind of enjoyed his harrowing experience as well. On one occasion when he was out bombing trucks or some highly useful object like that. He took a lot of ground fire, which all of us always did, small arms fire, but on this occasion one of them was lucky and it knocked out the control mechanism between his stick and his elevators in the back that control your nose attitude. And airplanes are designed to go nose down, just aerodynamically, which his plane did, without any elevator control. I guess sort of precursor to his being a great test pilot, he quickly remembered he had an electrical trim tab on top of that stick, and he activated as much as he could and missed the ground by 100 feet or so. But in the process, he ran into a pole of some kind, knocked off 5 feet of a wing, and leisurely made his way back over friendly territory, realized he couldn't get back to a carrier, ejected, was recovered by friendly forces, and the next day he showed back up in the squadron, took his place in the flight schedule. You know, but to Neil, big day. I need to say something about the current situation in terms of veterans and who they are. But before I do that, I want to go back to Korea and just emphasize something that President Sten said. You know, I went on 2 combat tours, each one of which was 11 months long. And that's a lot of separation, a lot of absenteeism. I left behind a 20-year-old or so, in her 20s, let me put it that way, with 2 daughters. I'd taken out 3 $10,000 life insurance policies, which for my crowd was pretty high. You stop and think about it today, and I just shudder at the realization. We now have, you read it in the paper, and did a lot in the last couple, 3 or 4 years of guys and gals who didn't come home from Fort Lewis and McCord and the like. We lost, in Korea, we lost 54,000 killed, 2,000 missing. In Vietnam, 58,000 killed, 1,700 missing. Probably a third of it, at least, were married with young families. Stop and think about it. I'm lucky enough to be able to look down on my spouse, best friend. I mean, those are real veterans. What is it? Somebody once said, they also serve who stand and wait. Remember them on Veterans Day. It's crucial. And remember these young people that are over there now fighting for us. As I said earlier, 1.47 million, 1%, less than 1% of Americans. And what are they doing? They're giving us the privilege to go vote any way we like. We can dissent or we can applaud, or we're at liberty. It's freedom. They're keeping it that way. They create terrific stories to tell, all of them horrible. I want you to read a book. It's called Lone Survivor. It's just one of many, many books that have been written about the current situation. Lone Survivor is a story of 5 U.S. Navy SEALs who were dropped into Afghanistan on one of those rocky hills. They hadn't been there more than a couple of hours when they were discovered. And for the next many hours, they were in firefights with 5 of them against over 100 Taliban. 4 of them lost their lives. 1 of them got back, thanks to Afghanistans who covered for him. It's a good book. Read it. It'll tell you something about today's heroes and today's veterans. And remember, tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, it's Veterans Day. Tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, take a moment out and stop and think seriously about what we owe these people in the past, in the present. They give us the liberty we have to assemble as we do here. That our future is bright as we want to make it. Remember them. It's Veterans Day. God bless them all. God bless America.
Tom, thank you so much. We are greatly honored to have you speak to us today. The wars in which we are engaged makes us especially aware of the perils our soldiers confront every day in order to secure safety and freedom for America. It is such an honor to take this brief moment to think of them and recognize all our veterans of military service. When thinking of speeches honoring war heroes, there is one that inevitably comes to mind, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The power of its message is timeless. And for our service segment this Veterans Day week, I could think of nothing more appropriate for closing our meeting. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. We are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.